As the day wore on, I could see my father getting more and more impatient and excited. By 5 o'clock we'd finished work on the baby Austin, and together we ran her up and down the road to test her out. At 5:30 we had an early supper of sausages and bacon, but my father hardly ate anything at all. At 6 o'clock precisely, he kissed me good-bye and said, "Promise not to wait up for me, Danny. Put yourself to bed at 8 and go to sleep, right?" He set off down the road, and I stood on the platform of the caravan watching him go. He turned and waved to me. I waved back. Then he disappeared round a bend in the road. Inside the caravan, I stood on a chair and lit the oil lamp in the ceiling. I had some weekend homework to do, so I laid my books out on the table and sat down. But I found it impossible to keep my mind on my work. The clock said 7:30. This was the twilight time. He would be there now. I pictured him. Inside the wood I could see him treading carefully over the leafy ground, all the time searching and searching for the keeper, who would somewhere be standing still as a post with a gun under his arm. I closed my books. It was no good trying to work. I decided to go to bed instead. I undressed and put on my pyjamas and climbed into my bunk. Soon I fell asleep. When I opened my eyes again, the oil lamp was still glowing, and the clock on the wall said 10 minutes past 2. 10 minutes past 2. I jumped out of my bunk and looked into the bunk above mine. It was empty. He had promised he would be home by 10:30 at the latest, and he never broke promises. He was nearly 4 hours overdue. At that moment, a frightful sense of doom came over me. "Hold it, don't get panicky. Last week you got all panicky and you made a bit of a fool of yourself." Yes, but last week was a different thing altogether. "I promise I'll be back by 10:30. Those were his exact words. And he never, absolutely never, broke a promise. It took me 2 seconds to decide what I should do. Very quickly I stripped off my pyjamas and put on my shirt and my jeans. Perhaps the keepers had shot him up so badly he couldn't walk. I pulled my sweater over my head. Perhaps he was lying in the wood bleeding to death. How long would it take me to get to the wood? An hour and a half. Less if I ran most of the way, but not much less. I ran down the steps of the caravan and across to the workshop to get the torch. A torch is a good companion when you're alone outdoors at night, and I wanted it with me. I grabbed the torch and went out of the workshop. I paused for a moment beside the pumps. There was no wind at all, no sound of any kind. To my right, going away into the blackness of the countryside, lay the lonely road that led to the dangerous wood. 6.5 miles. At that point, a wild and marvellous idea came to me. Why shouldn't I go in the baby Austin? I really did know how to drive. My father had always allowed me to move the cars around. This was an emergency. If Dad was wounded and bleeding badly, then every minute counted. I'd never driven on the road, but I would go very slowly and keep in close to the hedge on the proper side. I went back to the workshop and switched on the light. I opened the double doors. I got into the driver's seat of the baby Austin. I turned on the ignition key. I pulled out the choke. I found the starter button and pressed it. The motor coughed once, then started. Now for the lights. There was a pointed switch on the dashboard, and I turned it to S for side lights only. Then I slipped the gear lever into reverse. Slowly, I backed the car out of the workshop. I left her ticking over and went back to switch off the workshop light. It was better to keep everything looking as normal as possible. The filling station was in darkness now, except for a dim light coming from the caravan where the little oil lamp was still burning. I decided to leave that on. I got back into the car. I switched on the headlamps. That was better. I searched for the dipper with my foot. I found it. I tried it, and it worked. I put the headlamps on full. If I met another car, I must remember to dip them. I pressed down the clutch pedal again and pushed the gear lever into first. This was it. My heart was thumping away so fiercely I could hear it in my throat. 10 yards away lay the main road. It was as dark as doomsday. I released the clutch very slowly. At the same time, I pressed down just a fraction of an inch on the accelerator with my right toe, and stealthily, oh, most wonderfully, the little car began to lean forward and steal into motion. I pressed a shade harder on the accelerator. We crept out of the filling station onto the dark, deserted road.